Shogun, episode 10, the finale. And let me say right up front, I'm just a little disappointed about this episode, about this finale and how it kind of played out. Although I do appreciate what they did. Just a little nitpicking. Again, this is the first time I've watched it. I always go back and watch a second time, so maybe I'll feel a little differently. But we'll get into that in just a second. Really quickly, let's talk about episode 9. I apologize I did not get episode 9 video out last week. But let me talk about that for just a second. I won't go too deep into it, and I will put a timestamp to jump straight to episode 10 if you wish to do so. But of course, last week we lost Mariko, and this was pretty much out of the book as far as how it went down. It pretty much all focused on Mariko and her mission, and this was the actual Crimson Sky mission as we kind of thought it was going to be, with her going and probably trying to get to Ochiba in some way and trying to change her mind. And that's exactly what was confirmed in episode 10. But we go through that entire episode with her, basically calling out Ishido in front of everybody and making the other lords realize they were the hostages. Ishido was there in power. He was the one that was the real enemy as opposed to Toranaga, and basically sowing the seeds of distrust and all that to break up the council, which eventually works, as we hear about in episode 10. But it was a really sad episode as far as Mariko. You could see the pain in Blackthorn's eyes. They had one last really good moment together. She was going to self-delete. He was going to step up and actually second her and help her do that. That really brought them even closer for him to be able to step up and do something like that for her. And they had that final good moment together before the ninja, or Shinobi no Mono, attacked. And that was also straight out of the book as well. Now, I will say that historically there will be some arguments, I'm sure, online somewhere in the comments about these ninja or shinobi. And this is the world I come from as far as martial arts, ninjutsu training, and samurai arts and all that good stuff as well. Japanese jiu-jitsu in general. This is what I've been training in since 1993 or something like that. But the point being that there will be some arguments on the authenticity of the ninja or shinobi no mono and what they actually did, as opposed to running around in suits with masks on, black suits, a kind of traditional ninja thing we've heard since the 1980s. Becoming popular in Japan in the early 1900s. The old word for this during this time period is shinobi or shinobi no mono, and it was more likely that they were just essentially spies and practiced spycraft. A really good example of this actually is Muraji, who we saw the last couple episodes as well. We got the reveal that he was actually a samurai who's playing a fisherman. That's what a real ninja or shinobi no mono would be like. So he was really historically accurate as far as a ninja goes. But again, in the show, we saw that Yabashige helped this ninja group or shinobi group come in and start this attack to kill Mariko. Although, again, for Yabashige, it was supposed to be just a capturing of her, not actual death. So he really did feel bad about it. But this is what he gets as far as episode 10. We'll talk about in just a second. He played both sides, and he lost. He didn't position himself in the right spot, although he tried to at the end. Really sad to see Mariko go, but she did go to try to save them. And very similar in the books from what I remember correctly. She holds back this group of shinobi and lets Blackthorn and others escape with the actual hostages. So a little bit different, but essentially the same thing as what went down in the actual book. Anyway, let's jump to episode 10. I will say, again, little disappointed. I mean, it was very powerful. Don't get me wrong. It was very good. I'm not saying it was bad by any means. Very good, very powerful, especially the great scene between Toranaga and Yabashige on the cliffs there. But it wasn't what I was really expecting. I didn't think this was going to be an action series, but I thought we would get a little bit of a battle. And again, I can appreciate how they did this with the kind of a flash forward when Toranaga is telling Yabashige what's going to happen. But I would have preferred at least some type of a battle, even if it's a smaller battle or just the beginning of a battle. Just a little bit of samurai on samurai action that we were kind of expecting, I think, this episode. It's very powerful, very good. It's not bad by any means. And a little bit more of a definitive, this is what happened. He actually becomes Shogun, what happens to the heir, what happens to all his men. Just wanted to see some of those definitive moments, and maybe even Toranaga being crowned Shogun for the first time, because this does lead up to the historical Battle of Sekigahara. And this battle was widely considered the battle that actually starts the Tokugawa in real life, or Toranaga shogunate, during the year 1600, and this was against Ishido and all the other loyalist clans. In real life, this would be the Toyotomi clan, which is essentially what Crimson Sky was all about, was going back, reaching out to her old friend, kind of touching her in some way, and making her change her mind and essentially join Toranaga. But it would have been, I think, really great to see, some portion of this battle of Sekigahara in the show, this epic battle, because if you read about this battle, it was a giant battle. Tokugawa had about 75,000 men, and I believe Ishido would have had about 120,000 1,000 men. Of course, again, some of those defected, some of those didn't show up or whatever. We did see the outstanding scene between Toranaga and Yabushige again on the cliff. So this was an outstanding scene where he kind of lays out what was going to happen in the future, which is, again, kind of weird. We don't really know from the show's aspect, is that successful? You just kind of know by actual history that, that it actually was successful as far as the whole plan he laid out. But he lays out Crimson Sky, and that was, again, sending Mariko alone to Osaka to change Ochiba's mind. And essentially that's what she did, and we can Ishido's grip on the noble families. And Yabushige finally kind of realizes what Toranaga's been up to, that he's actually been planning to become shogun the whole time, and exclaims to him, "You're no better than the rest of us in your secret heart." And again, we talked about those 3 hearts and the actual Japanese philosophy of 3 hearts or 3 faces. But we also learn about Blackthorn's fate. He smuggled out of Osaka and kept alive by Jesuits, but that wasn't really the whole deal. It was actually Mariko and Lord Toranaga who actually had backed her and agreed to let him live. So Toranaga actually sunk the ship himself and then blamed it on Christian spies. He cracks down on the villagers as some kind of test for Blackthorn, and Blackthorn was going to self-delete as well. And this actually comes from the book as well, just a little bit differently. In the book version, he does this same thing, but it's only because he wants him to learn Japanese. So he tells him to learn Japanese, gives him a certain amount of time, and if he doesn't, he says everybody in the village will die. So he tries to commit seppuku himself in order to save the village, and that's kind of the test he passed in the book. So pretty much the same thing. They just kind of moved it around to a different spot in the show. But also Blackthorn sees through Toranaga's scheming. He really starts to understand how deep his scheme goes. And even he thought that it was just Mariko acting alone to save his life, but it was Toranaga pulling the strings in the background as well. But obviously we did hear from Toranaga talking to Yabushige that Mariko did want this, and Toranaga simply agreed. So Toranaga stops him from self-deleting and then tells him to build him a fleet that he will actually later use. And again, we didn't get to see that fleet being used. And we do know from history that he never does leave Japan. Now, we did see these odd shots, and again, this was a dream within a dream. This was the title of this episode, of Blackthorn kind of being old and in bed still holding Mariko's cross, thinking back on his time in Japan. But that's not what actually happens. That was a dream within a dream, because we saw that he did throw the cross overboard when he and Fuji went out to sea, where she dumped her husband and her son as well. Those scenes were a little odd, but I think that was what was in Blackthorn's mind as to what would eventually happen. But again, that would have been nice to kind of make that a little bit more clear in the show. And I thought it was also interesting here that Toranaga, there was a lot of respect between these two, and he explains to Yabushige during this scene as well that he kept Blackthorn alive, and he had so many opportunities to let him die. But he said, not because he's really that important, but because he makes me laugh. And of course, he was essentially used to distract his enemies. But this was from the Japanese perspective, so he wasn't that big of a deal, and he would have won without him, is what he tells Yabushige. And again, back to this scene with Toranaga and Yabushige before he actually dies. He does commit seppuku, and Toranaga does second him, and they do act like they're old friends here. But Toranaga is telling Yabushige what will happen in the future, and it was just kind of odd. I don't know. I mean, again, I'll watch it a second time, and maybe I'll feel a little bit differently about it. And we see Ishido in that scene actually receiving word that Ochiba has actually betrayed him, and that he will not have this giant army he thinks he does. But we also do hear Toranaga tell him that everything is going to take place from Edo. This is his base of power. So Osaka essentially is not going to be the capital anymore, and Edo will become the new capital under the new shogunate that will last 200 and something years through his family, and that will become modern-day Tokyo. And I still want to know if there's a brothel somewhere in the middle of Tokyo right across from a church. So anyway, overall, very good episode, very good series, some of the best TV in a long, long time. Just a few nitpicks here and there, and again, that's fine. I totally understand where they're coming from about the battle thing, but I do think there are times for some good action scenes, and especially in a series like this about war. And more importantly, maybe do a flash forward 3 years later, which is about what it took in real history for him to officially become shogun. But let's see Toranaga be actually crowned shogun, so it's a little more definitive. But overall, really enjoyed this episode, the whole entire series for that matter. It was really, really beautifully shot, very poetic. You got to see from the Japanese perspective, really historically accurate for most everything I've seen. We also learned, of course, that Fuji had decided to become a nun, so she's getting some relief. She's essentially becoming what she wants to be and to get out of this kind of life. We see Buntaro. I thought that was a really good scene as well, just to mention a couple of these little things that I really enjoyed. Buntaro, he comes up and actually offers to help Blackthorn, and you see the respect there now. And of course, you can't forget, just the cinematography, the score, costumes, all that stuff. This is a really, really outstanding show. Again, the best TV in a long, long time. But really sad to see it go. Sad to see Mariko go last week, and her memory lived on throughout this episode as well, as she wrote a poem that Toranaga also read later that made him realize she was the one who turned this thing around for him and pulled off Crimson Sky. If I could use words like scattering flowers and falling leaves, what a bonfire my poems would make. So R.I.P. Mariko, R.I.P. Yabashige. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As usual, thank you for all the support, especially you guys on Patreon. And a huge shout out to my executive Patreon SmokeScreen producers, as well as YouTube channel members. You guys keep this channel going. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.